inertia, the tendency for bodies at rest to remain at rest,
Mhm.
and momentum, the tendency for bodies in motion to remain in motion. If we take somebody that has just been sitting 20 hours a day in a tent on a sidewalk, which has got to be the most boring those days have to seem like weeks long.
Right.
But they're used to doing very little to nothing. So now we move them into a place, they're inert. They're sitting there, and it seems to me that the caseworkers are so important because it's really hard sometimes to self-start from zero. But if you've got someone there that's coming by saying, okay, look, let's get a haircut, let's get some decent clothes, let's talk about what's your consequential knowledge? What is it you know how to do? What did you do before? Did you work on cars? Did you have good people skills? I mean, to really get them to start putting small goals in front of themselves and move. I've seen people that I've worked with that when you got them clean, you got them haircuts, you got women where they got any kind of modest wardrobe, anything where they sat taller, they stood tall, they wanted to do the next thing.
Absolutely.
But it just takes so little that I think they could really move. And drug treatment, the same thing. All of a sudden, they've got a place to live. They start saying, all right, I need to ask more of myself, but they need that little bit of help. How much follow-up and how much casework do these people get once they're in a stable home?
Well, so permanent supportive housing is not just the housing, it's housing and services. So everything you just described is what that case manager is trying to do. But they're giving the person the agency to make that decision. And it isn't, you have to do this tomorrow. You can get there over a period of time. You can gradually get there. And I believe that we should also do that in the shelter system. And that's what I did in the shelter I operated in Orlando. So, I had job fairs. I had recreational activities. I had motivational segments that happened at the shelter. So the housing first mentality doesn't have to be giving someone a house right then. It could also be looking to see what that next option is while they're in a shelter situation. So giving them case management, giving them all kinds of things that build on their own skills, the asset building that you talked about. And, that's actually what happened to me. So I, have been an actor in my life. I've done theater. I've done a few movies. I've done a bunch of commercials prior to me becoming homeless. And when I talked to my case manager and told them about that, they created a job for me that allowed me to utilize all those skills. And it was so impactful that I never went back to acting or comedy or the stuff that I used to do. I stayed involved in the homeless movement. And, it's incredibly tough to do that for everybody, but everybody has that something. They were an artist, they were a welder, they were a singer, they worked in a factory. And if you do that, what you described, if you tap into whatever that skill set is, and that's what case managers are doing every day. They're working with people within those permanent supportive housing units, and they're also providing people that have already done that. I had a guy that he became a mentor, and what he said is the reason I do this is I want people to see that they can get to the other side by seeing me do it myself. And so we have a lot of programs that have those ingredients. Unfortunately, not all do, of course. Not all of the programs have the adequate supportive services to move people on. But part of that, again, lies in the lack of a overall full sail government response. So instead of HHS and labor and all these other governmental agencies providing resources at the same level that HUD does, we're not seeing that. If we could see that, then what you say would be something that would be happening more regularly.
How much do you see it now with people that you've gotten off the street, gotten into a stable home? How much do they actually attend day treatment for rehab? How much do they actually go to work? What are the stats on people that take initiative and go to the next level?
It's hard to quantify that across the country, but I know my success rates in transitional and shelter were like in the 70% range. If you give people that opportunity, they'll take advantage of it. Not 100%, but I believe that most of the programs, like permanent supportive housing, has a 90% success rate for people just staying in the housing. And if they stay in the housing, everything else is possible. Over several years, it's still at 70%. Obviously we lose some people. These are the most vulnerable people on the street. So their life expectancy is going to be a little shorter. But even 4 years out, people are still at the 70% range. So when we provide these opportunities, the problem is we have a really tough time finding units for people to rent. All of the caricatures that people see. I know the young man is really trying to do his best to help with the TikTok videos. But when we villainize people, it really, the caricature that's created really doesn't allow people to understand that these are like the person next door. And if we give them a hand up, not a handout, we can really change, the direction of this country. Once we actually have an impact on homelessness, it impacts every other layer of society. And so if we could just convince people that people are people, you and I are perfect examples. I mean, we're doing our best to give back. And we're, I see this as my ministry. I do this because I think I went through those things to prepare me for this. And so, if people just, looked at who's truly been a victim of this issue and not rely on the stereotypes, we could really start to make some difference.
Well, I'm a believer in it because I don't think I was particularly good at it. But when I was on the street, I had a job every day. And I think a lot of people out there did have a job every day.
I did as well.
Yeah, I was young, but I was tall, so I looked old enough to have a job. But, I just went up and down the street. And this was back in the 60s. There weren't so many big chain stores. There were a lot of mom and pops in downtown Kansas City, and you just go from door to door. Hey, do you need any work done today? And you get a lot of no's. So you customize your pitch and say, you got a stock room that needs cleaning up? And I said, no, I'll get out of here. And then pretty soon the guy's wife said, hey, he's got a good point. Looks like a tornado went through there.
Absolutely.
Pretty soon you got a job cleaning up a stock room, and it lasts 2 or 3 days. And then they take you to the guy 2 doors down. They and said, this kid did a really good job cleaning up my stock room. Then you're cleaning up his down there. And then pretty soon they let you sleep in the stockroom at night. And then before you know it, you kind of got a little cottage industry going on. You can work it out if you do, and then you take pride in it.
Absolutely.
And you get going. And I saw a lot of people do that. And you're right. It's kind of a contagion effect. You see your buddy and say, hey, I got a job. Get a job, man. Let me introduce you to somebody. You can help me do this. I think people want to do better. They just need that first step. And it just seems to me that what you're doing makes all the sense in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I think the audience today, when you and I were working together, it seemed like we put a face on this.
Yes.
And I know you didn't like seeing those TikTok videos, but I thought it was good to say this is less than 1%.
Right. He did.
But if we don't acknowledge that, people say we're just whitewashing this and not acknowledging that these places are stinky and that there are some dangerous characters in there. And if we acknowledge, they say, okay, they're being straight up about this, but those are human beings in there and we need to help.
And, sometimes they're not even homeless. I mean, so when I hear people talk about like the needles and stuff on the street, we don't know who left those needles there. We don't know if they're homeless or housed or the CEO of a company. And we also need to remember the origins of some of those epidemics. I mean, there was no, it didn't happen by mistake that the opioid epidemic started. I mean, the companies that started that knew that it was going to cause addiction issues. And some of them are paying, huge fines for that. But we blame the people at the other end instead of blaming the people that started that in the first place.
They were targeted and victims.
Yeah, and the crack epidemic, we know the federal government had a role in that. And, what I'm saying is those institutions should be paying reparations to people that are homeless. People are forced into the issue, and the people who were responsible for that should be responsible for the solutions.
What is the cost, if you know, to the government for people that are chronically unsheltered at this point? Because it isn't free.
No, and when we created a solution called the Bring America Home Act in 1981, I'm sorry, I said 1981. I meant 2001. The last bill that's still in existence that still funds homelessness was 1987. So I'm not that far off. But it was about the Congressional Budget Office scored it at about $81 billion. I think it's probably in the trillions now. The solution cost, and I think, if you think about the cost of what HUD spends, it's for homeless assistance, it's in the billions of dollars that HUD is spending right now. And I don't, I'm have a many statistics in my head. I can't remember that exact number today, but it is actually not as robust as it was in the 80s. But it's very expensive.
What I want people to understand is that these people on the street aren't free.
No.
So putting them in a home first situation, you got to look at the delta, because they're not free on the street.
No.
We're looking at the difference between the two. It's not zero versus putting them into an apartment or a house. There's a cost that's there to begin with.
And that's one of the big issues around criminalization, because all of that money that's already been spent, whether it's through hiring outreach workers or case managers or intake workers, every time you move someone, you have to start that process over again. And so we're wasting dollars, not only the cost of incarcerating people, we're wasting the HUD dollars who've already been used on those people, or the healthcare for the homeless dollars that go into people getting free access to healthcare. Those dollars are actually going out the window, and they need to be doubled down on every time we move people. They have to restart that process. I just don't think like some of the elected officials, when they come up with these myopic solutions, and it's really because people are complaining, homeowners are complaining, it's too close to their communities. The reaction from elected officials, especially around this time when there are elections coming up, are these quick fixes, these myopic solutions that really, you have to recreate every year and you never get to anything final. I talked about Tennessee. In Miami, they want to put people on an island. They want to move all the homeless people to an island.
Like a leper community?
Yes. And it's right next to a hazardous waste facility.
Oh, that's great.
In Missouri, they made it illegal to do permanent supportive housing. So, there's all these, there's a group that's going around the country that's actually promoting model legislation that really is not productive, which is causing harm to communities. It's called the Cicero Institute. And I mentioned them before, but they are providing this model legislation. And even, states like California, more progressive communities, one of the things they promote is what just passed in California, the California Cares Initiative, which would allow people to be put into mental health facilities involuntarily. So we think that that's an approach that, again, it's a myopic solution, because even when they go to those facilities, there's no housing on the other end. So you may have mitigated the issue for a very short period of time, but at the end, you haven't ended their homelessness.